abandoned a crucial board meeting the second the frantic call came. My mother was in the emergency room at St. Jude's Medical Complex in Bellevue, needing immediate funds for surgery. I sprinted through the double doors, only to be violently yanked into a dark medical supply closet. A mysterious nurse pressed a finger to her lips. Through the cracked door, I saw my mother, Jennifer, sitting perfectly upright. She was laughing with my brother, Justin, and Dr. Phillips, conspiring to fake a cardiac emergency for a massive payout. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp or burst through the door in a tearful rage. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was entirely clinical. The panic that had gripped my chest just seconds ago vanished, replaced by a cold, meticulous focus. I was a 30-year-old corporate defense lawyer. I didn't deal in emotional breakdowns. I dealt in undeniable evidence. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket, dimmed the screen brightness to absolute zero, and smoothly activated the voice memo application. The red recording dot blinked in the darkness of the supply closet, silently capturing every syllable of their extortion plot. I listened as Dr. Phillips detailed the fraudulent $320,000 hospital invoice they were currently preparing. I listened as my brother, Justin, bragged about how seamlessly easy it had been to initiate a wire fraud transfer. A transfer that would completely drain the lifetime savings and joint investment accounts of our father, Raymond. This wasn't a sudden medical emergency. It was a calculated, highly structured financial trap. The brilliant architecture of a manufactured crisis relies entirely on hijacking the victim's rational defenses. The perpetrators know exactly how to bypass analytical scrutiny. By introducing acute emotional panic, like the sudden, terrifying prospect of a dying mother, they create a state of shock. They anticipated I would react instantly, throwing massive funds at the problem without pausing to investigate the procedural details. It is a calculated psychological ambush. When the human brain is flooded with fear and adrenaline, the logical processing centers effectively shut down. You do not ask to see the itemized medical billing codes, and you do not verify the attending physician's credentials when you firmly believe you are holding a loved one's life in your trembling hands. They were relying entirely on my inherent loyalty to blind me to their blatant theft. They expected a terrified, frantic daughter ready to empty her accounts. Instead, they were getting a silent, calculating adversary. Through the narrow crack in the door, I watched Dr. Phillips hand Justin a thick medical clipboard. They openly discussed how my corporate background and high earning potential made me the absolute perfect high-value guarantor. They were intentionally locking me into this completely fraudulent medical debt while simultaneously wiping out my father's lifetime nest egg. They weren't shocked by what they were actively doing. I could hear the casual, relaxed cadence of their voices. It was just another business transaction to them. Now, I realized my entire relationship with this family had been nothing more than a premium subscription service, and I'd always been the one footing the massive bill. I stood perfectly still among the sterile bandages, letting the digital recording run. I rubbed my eyes, attempting to summon some shred of familial heartbreak, but there was only absolute icy clarity. This wasn't an emotional betrayal anymore. This was a balance sheet, and their liabilities were piling up. I had the raw data. Now, I just needed to audit their entire criminal operation. As I listened in the suffocating darkness of that supply closet, I reviewed the long, exhausting history of my role in this family. For decades, I had been the silent, reliable investor in their distorted version of a family unit. I was the designated financial pillar, entirely responsible for financing Justin's endless debts and covering my parents' extravagant household expenses. I was treated as a completely disposable asset, a corporate bank account with a pulse. My worth was calculated strictly by my utility, and my love had been commodified. The audio feed filtering through the cracked door confirmed my worst suspicions. Justin's voice echoed with sickening pride as he detailed the wire fraud. He had already successfully drained Raymond's lifetime aerospace pension. Every single dollar our retired father had built over 40 years of grueling labor in his accounts was gone, drained through a series of fraudulent wire transfers Justin had executed using forged authorizations, and now they were preparing to execute the second phase of their extraction. Dr. Phillips, the supposedly respectable chief of hospital administration, slid a thick financial liability form across the hospital bed to Justin. The corrupt doctor noted with clinical precision that my corporate background and substantial assets made me the absolute perfect high-value guarantor. They were intentionally maneuvering to lock me into a fraudulent medical debt, ensuring I would be legally bound to pay the fabricated $320,000 balance. It is a terrible thing to realize you are nothing but a resource to the people who are supposed to love you, but this is the invisible anchor of the family scapegoat. It is a deeply ingrained psychological mechanism that forces victims to endure years of systematic financial and emotional extraction before finally breaking free. Society conditions us to believe that blood obligations are sacred and unbreakable. Scapegoats are programmed from childhood to accept that their only path to receiving familial affection is through endless sacrifice and utility. Abusers leverage this conditioning, creating a cycle where the victim feels fundamentally responsible for the family's survival. The scapegoat internalizes the blame and the financial burden, convinced that if they just pay one more debt or solve one more crisis, they will finally earn genuine love. This toxic loyalty binds the victim to their exploiters, making the act of walking away feel like a profound moral failure rather than a necessary act of self-preservation. But listening to my mother casually remind Justin to secure her cut of the payout, that deeply ingrained programming completely shattered. The invisible anchor snapped. I wasn't experiencing a daughter's grief. I was experiencing a litigator's clarity. They had meticulously structured this trap, relying on my conditioned compliance to secure my signature. They wanted the dependable, dutiful corporate lawyer to blindly sign away her future to save a mother who wasn't even sick. They had calculated everything perfectly, except for one critical variable. They assumed I was still playing my assigned role. They assumed I would remain the blind, obedient safety net. They had no idea that the silent investor was actively preparing to liquidate all her assets. I took a slow, silent breath, memorizing the precise tone of their laughter. The liability form awaited me outside. I would give them the performance they desired, but the ink on that page would ultimately sign their ruin. I stopped the recording and slipped my phone back into my pocket. Pushing the supply closet door open, I stepped out into the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital corridor. It was time to perform. I rushed toward my mother's room, wearing the perfectly crafted mask of a terrified, panicked daughter. I burst through the door, my chest heaving, eyes wide with manufactured terror. My mother immediately collapsed back onto her pillows, groaning in theatrical agony, while Justin jumped up to play the deeply concerned brother. Dr. Phillips stepped forward, offering his most solemn, authoritative medical expression. He handed me the fraudulent liability clipboard, smoothly explaining that because the urgent cardiac procedure required specialized, out-of-network technology not covered by standard emergency insurance, the hospital strictly required a high-value financial guarantor before prepping the surgical suite. I didn't ask questions. I didn't hesitate. With shaking hands, I signed the document without reading a single word, playing my assigned role to absolute perfection. As a litigator, I knew a financial liability agreement signed under active fraud and fabricated medical diagnosis was completely voidable in a court of law. I wasn't signing my financial death warrant. I was signing their indictment. As soon as Dr. Phillips took the clipboard away, I excused myself, claiming I needed to contact my bank to authorize the massive transfer. I slipped away from the room, navigating the sterile maze of the facility until I found a completely secluded hospital stairwell. I pulled out my phone and immediately dialed Evelyn. She was the senior hospital records archivist at St. Jude's, a trusted professional ally I had represented in a complex labor dispute years ago. She owed me, and she hated institutional corruption more than anyone I knew. "Evelyn, I need an immediate metadata extraction for a patient named Jennifer," I whispered, my voice echoing slightly against the concrete walls. "Check the emergency intake logs and tracked the exact timestamp of the last medical record modification by Dr. Phillips. I heard the rapid clacking of her keyboard on the other end of the line. Within moments, Evelyn had completely bypassed the standard interface and accessed the raw server data. The criminal twist was sitting right there in the digital footprints. "Got it," Evelyn's voice came back, sharp and utterly professional. "The raw metadata shows Dr. Phillips manually altered Jennifer's electronic health records exactly 18 minutes prior to your arrival. He completely overwrote a diagnosis of mild gastritis to reflect acute cardiac failure. The original intake charts do not match the current system display. Electronic medical records leave indestructible metadata. Every keystroke, every deletion, and every modification is permanently timestamped and logged in the system's backend." Dr. Phillips was incredibly arrogant, assuming his administrative access made him untouchable. "Print everything," I instructed coldly. "I need the original intake charts, the heavily modified cardiac records, and the complete, unshakable system audit logs. Bring them to the third-floor cardiac wing immediately." With the digital evidence secured, I made one final tactical move. Fortunately, our extended family was already in town for my cousin's engagement dinner that evening. I initiated an urgent group call to everyone, informing them that Mom was in critical condition and that Dad desperately needed their support in the cardiac wing right now. I needed a crowded audience. I needed witnesses. I was actively coordinating an inescapable arena where my mother, my brother, and the corrupt doctor would be forced to face unshakable accountability. The trap they had built for me was about to snap shut entirely on them. I smoothed my jacket, erased all emotion from my face, and stepped back into the hallway to execute the climax. By the time I returned to the cardiac wing, the hospital hallway was already flooding with anxious, extended relatives. Aunts, uncles, and cousins had rushed over, their faces pale with genuine concern for a woman who was actively deceiving them all. Standing at the center of the growing crowd was my father, Raymond. The retired aerospace technician looked utterly devastated, his hands trembling as he clutched his worn leather wallet. He loved my mother deeply, and the sheer terror of losing her had aged him a decade in a single hour. He desperately pulled out his checkbook, offering to liquidate his remaining CDs and leverage his home equity on the spot to cover the required deposit. "Whatever it costs, just save my wife. Take the savings, take whatever is left, just do the procedure right now." The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. Dr. Phillips and Justin physically recoiled, genuine, cold panic flashing across their faces. They frantically stepped in front of my father, physically blocking his path from approaching the administrative desk. They knew exactly why Raymond's checkbook was completely useless. They knew that every single financial account associated with his name had already been drained to absolute zero through Justin's malicious, calculated wire fraud. If Raymond attempted to process a payment right there in front of the hospital staff, the transaction would bounce immediately. This would trigger an automatic financial alert that would ruthlessly expose the massive theft before they could successfully secure my corporate funds. "Dad, no, put that away," Justin snapped, his voice tight with barely suppressed panic. He aggressively grabbed Raymond by the shoulders, physically steering the confused old man away from the desk and shoving him directly toward me. "Your accounts can't handle a sudden financial hit like this. The bank will freeze the transaction for security reasons, and Mom simply doesn't have time for a delay." Justin's eyes locked fiercely onto mine, completely shedding the fragile facade of a worried son and effortlessly adopting the aggressive, demanding posture I had known my entire life. "Samantha has to do this," Justin demanded loudly, aggressively ensuring the entire hallway of crying relatives could hear him clearly. "She is the designated corporate bank account of this family. She has the liquid assets to clear this immediately. You need to process the $320,000 balance right now, Samantha. If Mom dies because you're stalling, her blood is entirely on your hands." I watched Dr. Phillips nervously adjust his pristine white coat, his eyes darting frantically toward the administrative terminal. The tension in the fluorescent-lit corridor was utterly suffocating. thick with manufactured grief and desperate greed. I stood perfectly still, silently watching my brother attempt to leverage public pressure to strong-arm me into the trap. He genuinely thought the heavy, judgmental stares of our relatives would easily crush my resistance. He was incredibly mistaken. I didn't flinch. I looked directly at the heavy hospital elevator doors, waiting for my tactical backup to finally arrive. The confrontation had reached its absolute breaking point. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. I stepped backward, creating a clear line of sight as Evelyn marched into the crowded hallway. She walked with the undeniable authority of a senior archivist who possessed absolute, irrefutable proof. I raised my hand, and Evelyn handed me a thick, sealed manila envelope. The entire corridor fell deathly silent as I slowly slid out the pristine, time-stamped audit logs. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the quiet like a surgical blade. "There is no cardiac emergency," Evelyn announced clearly to the stunned crowd of relatives. "Raw server metadata confirms that, doctor." Phillips manually altered this patient's electronic health records exactly 18 minutes before Samantha arrived. The original intake charts showed Jennifer was admitted for nothing more than a case of mild gastritis. Gasps echoed through the hallway. Justin's aggressive posture immediately crumbled, his face draining of all color. "Doctor?" Phillips stumbled backward, stammering incoherently as he tried to deny the undeniable digital evidence. But I wasn't finished. I pulled my smartphone, connected it directly to the powerful Bluetooth speaker Evelyn had brought down with the files, and hit play. My mother's chilling, completely relaxed voice echoed down the sterile hospital corridor for everyone to hear. "Remember to keep my cut. I am not sitting in this uncomfortable bed all day for nothing." Inside the supposedly critical care room, the effect was immediate and devastating. Hearing her own voice broadcasting her extortion plot, Jennifer's eyes snapped open. She threw off the hospital blankets and sat entirely upright, her terrified performance completely unmasked. The dying mother was instantly resurrected by the terrifying reality of getting caught. Corrupt networks, whether in a family or a hospital, survive only on enforced silence and blind trust. The second absolute transparency is introduced, the entire architecture disintegrates, and the conspirators immediately turn on each other. True to form, Dr. Phillips desperately tried to blame Justin, while Justin backed away from his suddenly healthy mother, but their collapse was already absolute. The facility administrator, whom Evelyn had wisely contacted on her way up, marched out of the stairwell accompanied by 2 heavy-set hospital security guards. They moved directly toward Dr. Phillips. Without a single word of negotiation, the administrator reached forward and physically stripped the corrupt doctor of his medical badge, escorting him away to face immediate criminal and professional ruin. The trap had been utterly destroyed. Raymond stood perfectly still, his eyes wide as he stared at the absolute wreckage of his family. The devastating truth washed over him in real time. He slowly lowered his useless checkbook, finally realizing that his son had maliciously stolen his life savings, and the wife he had loved for decades had actively conspired to rob him blind. The profound grief on his face quickly hardened into an unshakable, icy resolve. Standing before the shocked audience of extended relatives, Raymond found his voice. It was remarkably steady, devoid of the panic that had consumed him just minutes prior. He looked directly at Jennifer, the woman who had faked her own deathbed to steal from him, and announced that he would be filing for an immediate, merciless divorce. He then turned his hardened gaze to Justin, formally declaring in front of every witness present that his son was entirely stripped from his will and completely dead to him. Panic truly set in for the conspirators. Their safety net was rapidly vaporizing. With Dr. Phillips hauled away in disgrace and Raymond decisively turning his back, Justin and Jennifer swiveled toward me. Their eyes were wide, desperate, and pleading. They looked at me not as a beloved daughter or a cherished sister, but as their final, absolute lifeline. They genuinely expected the reliable corporate lawyer to step in, to offer a massive financial loan, and to manage the catastrophic legal fallout of their own making. I looked at the people who had treated me as a purely disposable asset my entire life. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel sadness or a sudden urge to fix their mess. I felt nothing but a cold, incredibly liberating emptiness. I pulled out my phone, looking right into my mother's eyes, and systematically blocked both of their phone numbers. I informed them with clinical precision that all financial support was permanently severed. I made it absolutely clear that if they ever attempted to contact me or Raymond again, I would leverage my entire corporate legal team to ensure they faced maximum federal prison sentences for wire fraud and medical extortion. I turned away from their stunned, silent faces, linked my arm firmly through my father's, and together we walked out of the sterile hospital corridors and stepped forward into the warm, brilliant sunlight. I've come to realize that the hardest battles we fight are often against the people who share our last name. What people often misunderstand is that walking away from toxic family members is never an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Society constantly teaches us that blood is an unbreakable tie, as if sharing DNA gives certain people a blank, unlimited check to recklessly mortgage your future and systematically break your spirit. We are conditioned to endure endless disrespect under the guise of familial loyalty. The absolute truth is, some people do not love you. They only love the utility you provide as an unlimited safety net. They love the comfort of your compliance and the resources they can seamlessly extract from your absolute silence. Until we stop shaming survivors for locking the door on those who actively try to ruin them, we are continually telling victims that their abusers deserve perpetual access to their lives. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes, it's the only way to set yourself free. And sometimes, that forgiveness looks like walking away entirely, refusing to ever look back. You do not owe your peace to anyone, no matter what name they share with you. Reclaiming your life is a radical, beautiful act of courage. It is stepping out of the dark margins where they deliberately tried to keep you and standing firmly, proudly in the center of your own existence. If you have ever felt like an outsider in your own home, if you have ever been treated as an option rather than a priority, understand that your worth is completely undeniable. Your worth is not defined by their tragic inability to see it. Your independence is not a punishment. It is your greatest, most profoundly healing victory. You have the absolute right to protect your joy, to curate your circle, and to defend your energy from those who only seek to drain it. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your peace from toxic family expectations? Drop a comment below, and let's support each other in our communities.